Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be painting a Hunter Slayer. Right. Remember when these were Hunter Slayers? Yeah, me neither. The truth is, I wasn't really playing 40k at this time, but you know what? You really get a sense of the DNA of Tyranids in general when you look at this guy, because what you see here is probably one of the very earliest prototypes for what would eventually become a Termagant. Yep. So he's got everything that you want in your nice termagant shape. He's got a hunched over sort of aspect. He's got some kind of a backpack looking thing over here, which is, I guess, where your adrenal glands and where your later upgrades would come on for your Tyranid termagant. And by the way, termagant is a really interesting word. So a termagant is actually an old English word for a kind of old lady who would yell at you. So it was entirely okay, or at least it was commonplace back then to refer to women who had a tendency towards being a widow, or who have a tendency to sort of be very acerbic and just very grouchy in general, to be called termagants. So there we go. Termagants, and to a lesser extent, basically every other kind of tyrannic creature. Most of them have like strange old names, like a Carnifex, for example, was kind of like a wild beast, and then a Harridan was somebody who had a bit of a temper. So most of these like characteristics, or rather, most of these names actually do have some kind of a meaning in Old English. It's just that I guess they've kind of passed out of general usage for now, and therefore, less recognizable to people like you and I. The ones who will be actually shopping for and picking up Tyranid creatures. Anyway, so back to the background for this creature. We're going to be doing it in high behemoth colors, or really referencing that planet of Tyranids, Tyran. Yeah, that home planet, or that first planet where they were discovered by explorators, and because that was a planet orbiting a red star. I'm sorry. So yeah, these guys essentially have red skin because that was the kind of logic that they were built with. It's interesting that in some of the later interviews with Citadel designers, they talked about how the Tyranids were always meant to have a little bit more of a like a dinosaur kind of aspect to them, rather than a kind of bug aspect, which I think may have been something that was said to kind of stave off the inevitable comparisons to things like Alien, in the case of the face huggers and all that, as well as to creatures that were kind of more bug-like in nature, like the Zerg. So yeah, these guys were supposed to look more dinosaur-like, and I used to think this was just this just sounded like some kind of an attempt to arm wave or hand wave away the obvious bug-like characteristics of Tyranids. But looking at this guy, he actually appears to give credence to that theory, because he looks a lot more dinosaur-like, almost like an octopoid, like an octopus kind of head with all these funny little suckers and spiracles through which apparently to breathe. So yeah, this guy, if anything, head as far as his head looks, does kind of look a little bit more dinosaur-like, and maybe that's basically the missing link between Tyranids and dinosaurs. Because in much later iterations of the Tyranids, they definitely start beginning to take on a more bug-like aspect. For starters, they've got multiple head plates, and I remember when I was a Games Workshop store boy back in the early 2000s. Um, yeah, the whole idea was that Tyranids always had very specific characteristics. They always had 6 limbs, for example, and they always had 5 plates on their foreheads. Those were supposedly the genetic markers that kind of were maintained by all Tyranid species, despite incorporating so many local species, local to this galaxy, that is. So yeah, interesting sort of little bit of backstory there. I never gave any credence to the idea that these guys were supposed to be like dinosaur like in any way. because they just look so far from that concept. I think it was I believe it was Jervis Johnson who actually mentioned that actually in a developer interview. But yeah, these guys definitely kind of almost like velociraptors, kind of like naked, insofar as if they have scales, they're very, very small scales, or if at all. And definitely they've got that sort of like hunched over, running kind of dinosaur raptor kind of look. So yeah, maybe there is more to the idea that these guys are more like dinosaurs. But other than that, yep, your venom sac or your toxin glands, adrenal glands, all of those things are still here. He does have a little creature sitting on his back. And the other little quirk I saw from looking this model over and over again while trying to develop a color scheme is the fact that he's got 6 fingers. He's got one, two, three, four sort of like medial fingers. Those are the ones that we use to like hold onto objects to wrap around. And then he appears to have 2 opposable digits. So one is the last finger that kind of wraps around where this is right there. Can you sort of see that little bit behind the flesh borer? And then the thumb is over here on top, right? So he does have 2 thumbs essentially on either end of the hand. No problem there. Makes sense to me. In my opinion, it makes the grip that he's got a little bit less dexterous because one thumb tends to get in the way of the other. But on the flip side, I guess he does have a very strong grip when needed, a very firm grip. And maybe that's just a thing that Tyranids need, and or else it might be a kind of biological throwback to an earlier state where they really needed like strong grip for whatever reason. Either way, it's just a little nice, like sort of nod to the fact that Tyranids have extra galactic origins, and I really like that conceptually because every time there's more of an attempt to try to reference like prior world building or backstory, I really enjoy it. So the other thing that he has is hooves only on his rear 2 legs. The last 2 limbs terminate in hooves, the way we sort of understand Tyranid termagants and hormagons to do today. This one only has its last 2 limbs terminate in hooves, and then it's sort of intermediate, have more hand-like projections, complete with individual fingers. So there seems to be 4 fingers on this limb, 4 fingers, and then that sort of terminal vestigial thumb that's on the reverse. Very similar to the way, say, pigs have it. They've got vestigial digits on the like halfway up their hooves. And then, of course, like we mentioned earlier, the front 2 sort of manipulating limbs, have 6 fingers, which is a kind of cool little detail. I'm sure a lot of people paint this model without actually even noticing that fact because as a species, us humans, we're so just coded to the idea of seeing hands as being 5 and having a sort of direction with an upward facing thumb. That the idea of a sixth opposable digit kind of looks a little bit strange, but that's to be expected because our human eyes are built for pattern recognition, and therefore stuff like this tends to escape our notice. Cool. I have put on this initial coat of our usual red mix, which I have grown very, very, very fond of over the course of doing many miniatures with this. It's essentially Blood Angel's red contrast paint mixed with Gryph Hound orange so that it gives it a little bit more warmth, and I kind of like the look that it has because it to me it just looks like it's just pre-loaded with highlight colors in it already, and it creates a nice range of color, a good mix of highs and lows. If you were, if I'm to be, a little bit a little bit amused with my own creation, so to speak. Okay, cool. So his funny little backpack over there, I realize, has quite a strong resemblance to some kind of a turtle beast, and it's kind of adorable because it looks like a turtle shell over on his back. He has tiny little rows of vents on his limbs. This might be some, throwback to a previous, like, ability to breathe through the skin, a little bit like insects do. grasshoppers today actually do breathe through these holes on the sides of their thorax, which is that sort of like the part of their body that's kind of like analogous to the butt, that sort of large, long butt at the end of their bodies. They've actually got a series of holes over there, so you know if you already didn't like bugs, that's another additional horror show to you know trigger your trypophobe tendencies, latent though they may be. Okay, so we're going to move on with our red mix. Going to drop in a little bit of Phalanx yellow, which is a new way of highlighting this color that I'm experimenting with. I find that the Phalanx yellow gives it a nice warmth and fleshiness to it, which I find works really well on Tyranids. So I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to apply this on the most prominent areas to sort of give it a little bit more of a three-dimensional volume. So I'm going to apply this essentially to the main sort of raised areas. You notice that I've left a lot of places in the original undercoat color, which by the way is Pylox gray white, roughly analogous to Vallejo silver gray, which is a color I use to cleaning up parts which you know get a little bit stained by other colors that I don't intend, to bring it back to the undercoat level. So this goes on fairly straightforward, just basically filling out those volumes, putting it where essentially I want the model to look raised. So this is really the tops of muscles, kind of like the thickest point of the tail, tapering slightly, and of course a little bit at the end, basically in places where it would catch light and you know sort of reinforce that three-dimensional look. Also, it's perfect for cleaning up areas that I might have missed, although it has to be in the right place for this to not compromise on the sort of shaded effect. But I think for the most part, this early on in the highlighting process, we are still quite close to the original color. So even if I do kind of apply this a little bit more heavily and not leave as much of the original dark color in the recesses because of the desire to touch up gaps, it's still kind of not a big deal. I'm going to go back in for a little bit more Phalanx yellow. Not sure if you can see the mix, but over there, more Phalanx yellow goes in. And what you'll find is that when you mix Phalanx yellow into this proprietary sort of proprietary, like I make the stuff, blood red and Hound orange blend, you'll find that what you get is something that is kind of approaching yellow orange, but with a little bit of a fleshy tinge to it, which I kind of like. It's not quite the extreme bright orange that you get when you mix yellow directly into red paint, for example, but it's a little bit darker and fleshier, and I find I really like that as a highlight. So we're just going to continue to drop this on all of his limbs, bearing in mind that he has many limbs. I think the most important muscle group to hit when applying this highlight is the deltoid, or where it would occur on the top of these individual limbs. Where the deltoid will be were the human limbs. Also, let's reinforce that sort of muscular process on the tail, that little sort of recess going down, and a little bit down the end as well, bit of where the knee would be, and then sort of the any raised edges where you know the light would catch, to brighten and to sort of make more distinct. This is a tiny little guy. I mean, when you compare him to modern termagants or homagons, this guy honestly is absolutely tiny. He's sitting on a 25 mil base, but he's kind of lost within the 25 mil round base. Whereas, as you well know, most of the modern homagons and termagants absolutely look like they're leaping off a 25 mil base. They're barely contained within the base's silhouette. But this guy, kind of tiny. Size wise, he kind of looks like he will be the size of a medium dog. So he's kind of, you know, maybe he's the Tyranid's goodest little boy. And you immediately want to protect this adorable little creature. Except he's got these hateful horror eyes, you know, horror movie eyes with these like malicious little blobby pupils. It's just hungering for your blood. But otherwise, he's a cute little guy, right? Because all sort of dog-like creatures kind of create that reaction in our minds. Cool. All right. So I am happy with him. He's beginning to look a little bit like an octopus, or at least like a Japanese cartoon octopus. Maybe just a little bit more brightness on the most pronounced areas, like on the back of his head, just to make it clear how weird and elongated his skull must be. The sort of froggy tops of his eyes, and the back of his head over here. In Singapore, we have a seed that kind of looks like this. It's got kind of this flattened, long ovoid shape. Yeah, so this kind of shape is very distinctive. It's called a shoria. So I don't know where they got the inspiration for this kind of head, but it kind of looks like it contains a seed of some description, as does the shoria seed. Anyway, cool. Let's move on to do the weird little backpacks and that kind of pseudo, clearly parasitic creature that's growing on his back. They're pretty horrible when you think about it. All these genetically engineered creatures, pretty horrifying. And no, I did not just drop my brush. Cool. So we're just gonna grab a little bit of this Kroxigor scale. And Kroxigor scale is a wonderful contrast to this deep red. What's nice about it is that neither of these colors are like primary versions of their colors respectively. Kroxigor scale being a little bit more like teal, and therefore a little bit kind of subtle and strange. Whereas the red has, because of the mix with the orange, a little bit of a fiery kind of look. It's more of ketchup, less of more brick, I suppose, would be a good way to describe it. Oh, and I didn't do his fingers. Oops. Okay, we'll get back onto that. Let's do the gun muzzle in this color. Let's do the little pistol grip thingy. And I think you can begin to see what I mean by he's got too many fingers. One extra thumb, rather. This white bit here is really supposed to have been red. We'll catch that when we touch up the red in a bit. Not to worry. And then he's got, of course, a little ovoid thing over here, which I think looks especially good and horrific when painted like an eye. Because, what every gun really needs is an extra targeting sight that doesn't sight on the barrel, but down the side. But I kind of like the look of that. Let's do this bit here. And then here. And then this funny little recess. And then his throat. Because why not? And we can come in and drop in spot highlights later, just to make sure these plays are extra horrific and hard to miss. So the thing about the smaller Tyranid creatures is that they were always kind of horrific looking. They always appeared to be in some stage of pain or disfigurement, from just the fact that they are subservient to the Tyranid cause. Apparently, being a Tyranid itself, in and of itself, is a pretty painful process. I'm trying to clean this bit up a little bit, because a little bit of the Kroxigor flesh got to there first. But once we apply our red, I think we should be good. There we go. Yeah. So being a Tyranid apparently in and of itself causes a lot of pain. Pretty horrific in nature, which shouldn't surprise everyone, because this concept of gene manipulation, I think, was an interesting concept back in the day. It was a fairly new thing in the 80s, and it kind of symbolized the prevailing idea at that time that gene manipulation was kind of the devil's work, right? and I think it kind of reflected, the salient issues of the day. Every one of the 40k races, in some ways, reflected, you know, society at large at the time, and Tyranids and their ability to manipulate genes freely, as well as to forcibly take them from people to manipulate them, I think was just a very specific part of that body horror paradigm, which you sort of see in things like The Thing, right? Which in films like The Thing, that John Carpenter classic, because the whole idea of forcibly assimilating species against their will was just really strong mojo for like horror films and so on at the time. And yeah, in a way, I think that kind of makes a lot of sense, and it makes for a very fertile ground for exploration, because body horror, kind of really came into its own around the time that these guys started becoming an interesting thing. And Games Workshop, very well known for appropriating and sort of iterating on ideas, very much took this on board and ran with it and created something unique and interesting at the time. Certainly, nobody else was making space dinosaurs running around with biologically implanted machine guns. So I kind of like that they kind of took something unusual and different and new, put their spin on it, and it kind of reflects the concerns of the day. Makes us remember what was going on in the zeitgeist at the time, and that's always interesting to think about. So Magos purple for this back turtle. I kind of had to restrain myself from painting it, like bright green like an actual turtle. Although that would have been adorable on some level, it would have been a special brand of horrific as well, I suppose. So never mind, let's not do that. The purple and teal and all the other non-primary colors, including a shade of red that's a little bit less, a little bit off from the typical primary bright red, really sort of like lends this idea of something that is a little bit liminal and a little bit creepy, and I really like the way that looks. So I'm gonna put a little drop of ooh, dude. Sorry. Let's try that when he's fully dry. Okay, I'm gonna take a little while to hair dry this guy. Back in a bit. Okay, we are back. So I'm grabbing a bit of Black Templar to fill in the pupils first. Always a good idea to do this if you want the eyes to really stand out, because all it takes from this point is a single drop of ice yellow, or its equivalent dawn yellow in the Games Workshop range, to kind of really just set the whole thing off. These claws, because I want them to appear harder and more, kind of resistant than the teal sort of areas, I'm going for a darker shade, which is Black Templar, which is, in my opinion, think of it as the darkest blue that you can have, because Black Templar does tend to stain blue, which I really do appreciate. I really do like that it's not a straight up black like Black Legion, which in my opinion just gives the most lifeless color. I really like Black Templar compared to Black Legion, and I would recommend that. Cool. And then that whole row of fingers. Not that there's anything sculpted on these fingers, but since everything else kind of has some kind of a rudimentary fingernail or rudimentary hoof, then I think it would behoove us to essentially paint this with an additional fingertip in a different color, just to suggest that hard surface. And looking at this now, I realize that it actually does have two additional opposable digits on either end of its hand, for the feet, for the middle pair of feet as well, which essentially matches the grasping manipulation hands at the front. Kind of cool. Really like that. Never really noticed this, to be honest, and yeah, kind of reinforces my appreciation for these slightly older models. Though they can be occasionally a bit goofy looking, as we've proved in the past already. So coming in with a little bit of ice yellow to pick out that eye. So as is the case from the casting process, sometimes these early miniatures don't necessarily have the most defined eyes. This guy notably has a pupil on this side, but no, sorry, an eyeball on this side, but no eyeball on the opposite side, unfortunately. So that gives us a little bit of a challenge when it comes to placing the eyes. You can see there is no pupil, no eyeball. Maybe a bit hard to hit. Something that gives a certain amount of balance, but we shall figure this out. And that's because these models, because they used to be sculpted at 1:1 scale using clay or putty, sometimes they would lose components when the mold hit. There was a sort of high pressure mold system that was used to create the original dies for the models, and sometimes that process, which was usually resulted in the destruction of the original miniature, the original master, could be unforgiving, and sometimes little details like eyes, eyeballs, sometimes would pop out. I've actually found, just over the course of my exploration painting models on this channel, that a great number of miniatures actually have this problem. They've lost either one or both of the pupils. I keep saying pupils, I'm not sure why. Either one or both of the eyeballs, and you kind of just have to fudge where the eye is, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I guess it's part of the process because that's the price you pay for a slightly more hands-on sort of manual process as opposed to what you get with CAD prints these days, which, to be fair, fail in a completely different set of ways, including leaving things like voxel lines or just bizarre little bits of detail which are actually too small to be ideal on the miniature. But that's how it is. So I'm adding a little bit more of a highlight, mostly also to clean up some of the red around. I really like that these guys have a bit more of a fiery kind of look. Also, it gives a little bit more definition to the body parts because there is actually a surprising amount of oozy, gribbly detail. Like this part of the spine has clear ridges and gives you a little bit of that sort of H.R. Geiger kind of look that must have been really popular at the time. These guys were released in 1987, sculpted and released in 1987. Therefore, inspirations like The Thing, which was 1982, or the Alien franchise, all of which would have been either at that time or a little bit before, would have been great inspiration for creating an extra galactic threat made out of weird, creepy, gribbly creatures which are biologically as distinct as possible to life from our own solar system. And I kind of really like how creative they've been with this creature. So, as I mentioned before, the Magos purple has gone down over the mouth parts. So you got the teeth over here. I like to come in with a little bit of dark flesh, just to reassert that little bit of dark flesh. I said dark sand, Vallejo dark sand, just to reassert that sort of yellowiness, that sort of warm kind of look of enamel. Okay to leave the Magos purple in the recesses because I think that adds to the sort of alien look. It would sort of resemble gums in a way, which is kind of horrifying, but that's how it is. I've left this stomach thing that he's got in front. I'm not quite sure what I want to do with that, but I'll have to think about it. I might just do teal, but teal might be boring, so let me just mull on that for a little bit. In the meantime, a bit more of our red blend to make sure everything mixes together nicely. I feel like the model really could do with some kind of a weird green tone, but the problem is that that little area over there is so far down that it's a little bit hard to see. So maybe let's just do that in Magos purple, because I really don't think these models need another color to kind of stand out. There's kind of a lot of surface detail, so when you got a model with just a lot of surface detail going on, you might not want to introduce too many colors because it can confuse the eye and sort of muddy the shape of the creature. Cool. Yeah, I see that's the right choice in my opinion. So I'm going to grab a little bit of Vallejo Silver Grey. I'm going to put that into some Kroxigor scale. And I'm going to just put some simple highlights around the extremities of the gun. And a little bit of the Gribbly sort of details on the front of it, just to define it a little bit more. And the other thing I really want to do as soon as I'm done with the gun is to make sure that I guess the sort of turtle scale looking parts of his back shenanigans are kind of picked out like the scutes of a real turtle shell. So let's see, how are we going to do this? First of all, I think I need to go a bit brighter because the contrast paint has kind of left relatively light amounts of pigment on the back, so it needs to go brighter. So let's do that row of scutes down the back first. So on a real turtle, these individual things would be like skull-like surfaces. Did I say skull? Scale-like, sorry. Scale-like surfaces, these scutes. And these would kind of individually flake off from time to time when the turtle sheds its scales on its back. In this case, I think it's supposed to look like some kind of weird, like parasitic trilobite kind of creature with lots of individual bits and bobs on the top. We don't need to be too precise with this, so long as we get the idea that there's variations of color on the back, and then a little bit more highlight on the gun. And I think this guy is in a very good place. I don't like belaboring models like this with too many colors because I think, like I mentioned earlier, readability is key. So let's keep it fairly simple and just make sure that the model has a really nice direction to its movement, and make it very clear that there's a very strong zenithal light source. We're going to come in with a little bit more Magos purple to make sure that these kind of connection points are nice and defined. They are far away the most horrifying parts of the model, and I really like the way they bring out that real sense of body horror to this hapless creature. Whatever he might have once been, he is now a Tyranid. Cool. Now, all flesh borers, and I mean, this might just be me, but I really like the idea of painting something on a flesh borer as an eye. I just think it's a really iconic Tyranid kind of look, something that almost every Tyranid creature has. And I think this is in response to the later artwork that often had some kind of a eye-like thing on the gun. Because indeed, as I've mentioned in a previous video, the eyes are supposed to be an entirely different creature. And that this thing is kind of a it's kind of a like a Portuguese man of war, where it's different colonial creatures or different kinds of creatures coming together, each with their own functional tasks to create a functioning animal. So the Hormagons, or rather the Termagon's gun, the flesh borer, if indeed this is an early prototype of a flesh borer, is supposed to have a different creature as its gun. And that's kind of horrific in its own way. So what I want to do is to make sure that I can put a little eye over here. And I hope I do this right with the Black Templar, because it is slightly runny. But I want just a very fine eye peeking up. Again, like I mentioned earlier, this is not the smartest place for an eye to be, but if it's just a vestigial thing, then maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the sole purpose of this eye is not to aim the gun or to do anything like that, but to just be, a light detection device to make sure that the little bitey creatures on the inside that it uses for ammunition are not unduly affected by ultraviolet light or so on. So maybe all this thing really does is detect changes in sunlight and ultraviolet light. It doesn't actually function as a real eye to target or anything like that. Or maybe I'm overthinking it. Definitely a thing. Alright guys, I think that's about it for this guy. Not a difficult model to paint at all, but what an absolute joy to paint. I think there is just enough gross detail on him to be interesting without making him a little bit too overcomplicated. So I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed painting this guy, and I really want to give him a few more friends as well as a few big Tyranid warriors to oversee this poor little chap and sort of direct him to die in his droves against the enemy. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye, love y'all, cheers.